An average Joe is cryogenically frozen, and when he wakes up 500 years in the future, he's the smartest person in the world. Special guest Mike Kahn joins us to chat about different kinds of electrolytes, vibrators at Target, and a president that actually admits to having sex with porn stars. If a great podcast is what you crave, join us as we find out if Idiocracy stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut, Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have to say, do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Test of Time podcast. I'm James Brief, and once again joining me, as always, he's the democratically elected director of this podcast, Alan Noah.
Hi, that's me, and we are joined by a very special guest coming back on the podcast today. It's Mike Kahn.
What's up, Al? Good to be here. What's up, James?
Welcome back.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's a big week for the podcast. It's always great to have Mike here. It's a big week for America. And, I might say a little America-centric statement. It might be a big week for the world because we have a big election going on, which will probably affect the United States and, outside our borders as well.
Well, Mike, you wanted to come on the podcast to talk about Idiocracy. I think, if I'm remembering right, you floated the idea back in 2016, and then the movie wasn't old enough. And I think maybe you mentioned it again in 2020. Still, the movie wasn't old enough. But now, in 2024, finally, we're past the 15-year mark, so we can talk about the movie. And I guess it's an obvious question as to why, but I want to get your opinion on why you wanted to talk about the movie before Election Day. And before we get into that, I do just want to give a little bit of I hesitate to use the word disclaimer, but we're going to talk about the movie Idiocracy today. And we'll talk about the actors and the writing and the VO and the special effects and all the things we normally talk about. And I don't know how the conversation's going to go, but I think it's a safe bet that we're going to be talking about this real life 2024 presidential election. I don't want to put words into either of your mouths, but I'm probably going to talk some shit about Donald Trump. And, look, if someone came to this podcast episode just to hear thoughts on the movie Idiocracy and you don't want to hear some liberal elites talking shit about Trump, I don't want to say turn off the episode, but we do have, 434 others you can listen to. There's other podcasts that you can listen to. Maybe this won't be your favorite. I just feel like we should say that up front.
Why does that guy come up every time we do a podcast together?
Has he come up before?
He came up during Pleasantville.
Okay.
He came up during PCU.
Oh.
He did not come up during I Know What You Did Last Summer. I don't know if he came up during Boiler Room. But now we've also recapped my podcast history here.
That's right. Yeah, we were going to quiz you to see if you could remember him, and you aced it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So all of that said, why did you want to talk about this movie specifically right around Election Day, Mike?
During the Trump years and the after Trump years, we definitely do see some parallels. We definitely do see some references. And I'm going to spoil the ending here a little bit. I think that this movie was a little bit ahead of its time, so to speak.
You mean in terms of Trump being president or in terms of society? Or what do you mean specifically?
In terms of society, I think some of the cultishness, I think people saying things and not understanding why they're saying them, and them saying them with such conviction, like we're hearing about Brando in the movie.
We're already going into this film. Why don't we actually remind people about this film? This is a movie about an average man named Joe Bowers and a prostitute named Rita. And these two are cryogenically frozen in 2005 as part of a military experiment. When Joe wakes up 500 years later, he finds that society has become, stupider. In this future, smart people have stopped reproducing, while less intelligent people have multiplied, and the country is now run by the incompetent. Joe is arrested after failing to pay a hospital bill, and he's given an IQ test. President Camacho, a former wrestler and porn star, realizes that Joe is one of the smartest people in the world, and he names Joe Secretary of the Interior. His job is to save the country's crops, which are dying from a steady diet of Brondo, a sports drink filled with electrolytes, which apparently is what plants crave. Joe suggests using plain water, but when the crops don't instantly grow, he's sentenced to death. Luckily, Rita sees a plant starting to bud, and she stops the execution. Camacho pardons Joe, and Joe becomes the next president of the United States.
So normally I would ask you how the movie did at the box office, but I know that this movie made no money at the box office because it was barely released in theaters.
Right. I mean, it's a Mike Judge film. So a Mike Judge film is going to be a huge flop in the theaters, and then it's going to get discovered on DVD and streaming.
But that was very much by design with this movie because Fox very deliberately didn't want to release this movie wide. They actually tried to scrap the movie and not release it at all for reasons that are in dispute, maybe because of the way it was talking negatively about certain corporate sponsors, maybe because of poor test screenings, but they contractually had to release it in theaters. They put it in 6 cities, small markets. It wasn't even released in New York and LA, I don't think. It was in theaters for 1 week, and then they pulled it, and they thought, yeah, maybe it'll make some money on DVD, but they really didn't want to release this movie at all.
That's interesting because in the days of Warner Brothers shelving entire $80 million films like Batgirl,
right,
you would think it would be almost a nothing to shelve this film, which had a $2.4 million budget, and it only made back that 0.4, under $500,000. This film earned $9 million on DVD rentals, DVD sales alone.
For as much as they tried to hide this movie from people, it's a lot more quotable than so many movies that made it big.
Yeah, I think it's less quotable than Office Space.
Yes.
At least for me, I quote Office Space pretty regularly.
Once a week easily, yeah.
Yeah, and Idiocracy, I think I've really only seen 2 or 3 times, including just watching it the other day for the podcast. It's not a movie I revisit often.
No, but how many times, like, if your kid's drinking Gatorade, might you say, it's got electrolytes?
Here's my interpretation of the joke about electrolytes. When the movie came out in 2006, that joke was funny because electrolytes was a word that I heard in science class in high school and then never again until I watched this movie. Now I feel like I hear the word electrolytes a lot. That might just be because of like the races and the things that I do where there's just sports drinks everywhere and they do say, this one has these electrolytes, these have these electrolytes, and the word electrolytes is more common, at least in that world.
Are there different electrolytes?
Yeah, I mean, electrolytes are different salts, so yeah, potassiums and sodiums. As we get to the winter months, all these babies are going to get sick, and I always tell the parents, like, fluids, breast milk, Pedialyte, whatever you can get in there. Pedialyte is basically Gatorade for little kids. I guess it would be accurate to say, just give them Pedialyte. It's got electrolytes. It's what babies crave. It is. When they're dehydrated, it's what babies crave.
Would the parents get it?
I'm in a neighborhood called Greenpoint, which is right on the border of a more famous part of Brooklyn called Williamsburg. So I think there's enough Williamsburg parents that will get that reference. If I say it to the right parents, I think they'll get a kick out of it.
I love it. The stuff I've been into for probably the last year or so is something called Element. It's one of those drink powders, kind of like Prime, you know it.
Yeah, very salty.
Yeah, very salty. Mm-hmm. Tastes good. It also like kills your salt cravings, which is good if you have cravings for salty things and you're 45 like me and everything stays with you.
So basically, It's got what Mike Kahn craves.
It does have what Mike Kahn craves, yeah. Okay. They've got this chocolate caramel flavor. It's delicious. Danny likes the watermelon. It's good stuff.
I like the watermelon too. But yeah, see, like that kind of just proves my point that the word electrolytes is kind of more prevalent.
Do you think it became more relevant because of this or not at all?
No, I don't think so. One thing that I didn't remember about this movie was how much fucking voiceover is in this movie. And I pushed play and I was like, oh, okay, maybe it'll just be in the beginning when they're doing the preamble about how society gets dumber, which, okay, fine, that makes sense. But it is not just there. It's throughout the whole entire movie. And that opening scene was really direct. You know, it really establishes the ethos of the movie, which is that all the other sci-fi movies where humanity gets smarter and more technologically advanced, those are wrong. It's actually the opposite. And I feel like that's a very clever premise, and I like that a lot. But man, they beat you over the head with that.
It's also not clear that this is global. It's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible that this is only confined to the United States of America, and the rest of the world has kind of closed off America. And it's completely possible that most of the world, France and Afghanistan are thriving, but it's America that's backwards.
I did wonder about that, yeah, because we have no idea what's happened elsewhere.
That's right. I think this is really a commentary, possibly more other aspects of so-called Western civilization, but I think more specifically early 21st century America.
Yeah, I think this definitely has an American focus. But the way that the voiceover is so prevalent in the movie, it did piss me off. And yeah, I talk about voiceover being annoying all the time. But there are like scenes in the movie that you don't get to really see because there's just voiceover explaining everything. And man, that really pissed me off. The one scene that pops into mind is after Joe is thawed out in the future and he's walking around, the voiceover comes on and says that the language of the common people is just grunts and they think that he sounds pretentious and so they fight with him and scare him off. We don't see what that initial conversation is when he goes up to people on the street and says, whatever he says, what year is it, where am I, what's going on, and then they threaten to beat him up. That seems like a thing that you would see play out as a scene and not just be a voiceover explanation.
You're thinking of the first time Marty McFly goes back to 1955. We really need him to walk into someone and go, hey, kid, what year is it? And look at the newspaper and be shocked. I don't think we really need that for Joe. We should skip that part where he's freaking out and like, what the hell's going on? I think the movie knows that happened, but it just says it happened. Let's go to the part where he meets Dax Shepard's character.
Also, in that voiceover, they don't just say that Joe sounds pretentious. They use the F word, and they throw that around a lot in this movie. And it does make it seem like in the future, in 2505 America, society is extremely homophobic, and it's fair to think that maybe societal progress that we are seeing now will revert back 500 years if that's what the movie is going for. Okay, fine. But it does just feel shitty. I thought it was shitty, like the way that they kept saying that.
The description of how they talk, a hybrid of hillbilly, valley girl, and inner city slang. I mean, that's kind of where they're going, where like everyone is just dumbed down. So, I mean, if you devolve everybody, then yeah, I guess maybe that is a word that they're going to start using again.
It bothers me because they don't just throw the F word out there once and kind of make a point about like, well, in the future, they're idiots. So only an idiot would say that. It's kind of just more a thing that they say a lot. Also, the way that they treat all of the women, not just Rita, but they are just there as sex objects. Even like the one woman who's in the cabinet, she's just wearing, like a super revealing outfit. She's just the hot girl in the White House. And when Rita shows up at the White House and Joe is like kind of going to sneak off to talk to her and, make their escape plan, the other guys who are there are like, do you want us to come along and we'll make sure that she puts out? And I think that's supposed to be a joke, but that feels really rapey. And then a couple minutes later, they come back and they're like, if you're done with her, the rest of us guys want to go family style on her. Do you mind? I don't know if the microphone picked up the you just made, Mike, but like, yeah, that's like, it's shitty. And these things I think could be commentary on the way society has devolved in the future, but it really doesn't land that way, or at least it didn't to me.
I think that was kind of the issue that I had with this movie as a whole. We get the point. I think we all understand the point. Anybody who watches this understands the point, and especially if you're in 2024 and you're probably like-minded with us, like we see the point probably even more acutely than they did in 2005. But it gets a little heavy-handed. I think that's where you're going. I don't think that that's Mike Judge speaking as Mike Judge, but I do think that that's Mike Judge trying to prove a point about what can be.
Like, what specifically do you mean is heavy-handed?
The Starbucks now sells hand jobs. H&R Block, the gentleman's rebate. The woman who gets her law degree from Costco. That was Frida who got his law degree from there, sorry.
Yeah.
But I mean, you go right down that list of just cringy things. The AOL Taco Bell US government phone assistants. I mean, so much is cringy. Welcome to Costco. I love you.
See, now that I loved, because that to me is, I think, where the movie's satire really worked, was when it was making fun of the companies. Welcome to Costco, I love you. I legitimately laughed out loud. I thought that was a really funny line. And there's a part where Joe goes to Carl's Jr. and there's a woman in front of him who can't pay. And then the automated machine kiosk thing says, "You are an unfit mother. Your children are now the property of Carl's Jr." Like, that's funny. To me, all of those jokes really landed. Even Fuddruckers becoming buttfuckers, that is super, super lowbrow humor. But those kinds of things I thought were funny and the not cringy parts of the movie.
That's the immature version of Mike Judge coming out. That's Beavis and Butthead Mike Judge.
I think that's Mike Judge, guys. Respectfully, I think people, they rightfully call Mike Judge brilliant, and they call Office Space brilliant, and I love King of the Hill, but he is lowbrow. You might have remembered Idiocracy a little more like Hamilton. Very, very witty commentary. Well, we'll talk about something from 200 years ago, but really it's a commentary on today. Brilliantly funny and witty, and it's very highbrow. That's not Idiocracy. I love the law degree from Costco. I think that the H&R Block and Starbucks are giving handjobs is incredibly... It is cringy, but... They sell guns and they sell a lot of other stuff. And you know, some people talk about they sell the vibrators at Target. I mean, they do. They do. They sell guns at department stores. They might sell the law degree. I don't know. Like, you know, it's
maybe
possible.
That's just the lawyer in me. I don't know.
I hear what you're saying about Mike Judge, and I love Beavis and Butthead for its lowbrow sensibilities. But I do think that even a movie like Office Space, it is a more clever satire than Idiocracy, because the primary characteristic of Peter, the main character in Office Space, is that he hates his job. Why does he hate his job? Well, we know from watching the movie, his job fucking sucks. Like, the time that we spend at Initech, we understand where he's coming from. So when he says, "I'm not going to work anymore," it's not just, "Oh, this guy's fucking lazy." We get it. We understand where he's coming from. The defining personality trait of Joe in Idiocracy is that when he's told to lead, follow, or get out of the way, he just wants to get out of the way. He doesn't want to have anything to do with solving problems. He's not a leader. And we know that because the movie just tells us that right out of the gate.
No, the Army tests. They do go out of their way to hit you over the head about how absolutely average Joe is in every way.
An average Joe?
Yes, yeah, exactly. But we don't really understand still why. Why is he so average? What is important about that? Like, his motivations aren't there. And that's not the only reason why I don't think the satire is super clever. But I just feel like Mike Judge has done a better job of satire, even in the movies, because Beavis and Butthead, King of the Hill, Silicon Valley, it's a different thing on TV. But even still, I feel like those are more clever.
It is. I would agree that Silicon Valley is one of his more clever things he's done. But I think the funniest thing I've ever seen, it's the last episode of the first season of Silicon Valley, which is a huge joke on the calculated, most efficient way for an entire room of men to be given hand jobs. Yes. And that is, it is done brilliantly through mathematics, and it's the analogy of how he's able to solve an unsolvable computer science problem.
Right.
And it's brilliant, but at the end of the day, it's a masturbation joke, and it's a pretty crude one. The way they draw it, and they draw angles, the way you draw math angles.
A Mike Judge movie, Beavis and Butthead, Office Space, watch an episode of King of the Hill, Silicon Valley. I enjoyed. I didn't enjoy this the way I wanted to. I got the point of it the first time. I got the point of it this time. But it wasn't fun. Did you guys ever see the movie Extract?
I saw it once, and I remember having that kind of reaction that, oh, I thought this was going to be wonderful and delightful, and it isn't. And I thought that because it was a Mike Judge movie, and I remember being disappointed by it.
I really, really wanted to love it. I wanted to sit there cracking up for an hour, and I didn't.
Yeah.
And part of me wants to say Mike Judge lost a step. The new episodes of Beavis and Butthead, they're fucking funny.
Yeah, they are.
Well, like the fire's ordering Beavis around?
Yeah.
That's freaking great.
It is. Well, let's get into the reason that we are talking about this movie right before Election Day, and that is all of the government stuff. So when Donald Trump was first running for office in 2016, God, that's hard to believe, that's 8 fucking years ago, but a lot of people said Idiocracy is coming true. Like, this is real life now. This satire has become reality. And I think Mike Judge first had the idea for this movie in the late 90s, and then, finished drafting it in the early 2000s when George W. Bush was president. And what did everyone say about George W. Bush?
That he was a fool.
Yeah, that he was stupid, that he was
Little
an idiot.
did we know.
Right.
You don't see often the New York Times writing, Donald Trump's actually a pretty cool guy when you're talking to him off the record and stuff. But you did see that a lot about George W. Bush. I remember even his biggest enemies would say, when the cameras are off, I think the G shucks guy is kind of an act. I don't think he's as dumb as he is. He's kind of a smart, witty guy.
Well, I'm just saying, like, the common joke around George W. Bush was that he was dumb.
Yes.
And a couple decades before that, we had President Ronald Reagan, who was an actor. I mean, he was also a governor before that, and he had political experience. So I think that when the movie was written, if Mike Judge was taking inspiration from presidents, which I don't know that he was, but if he was, then Camacho might have come more from Reagan and George W. Bush. And it was only when Trump was becoming a political figure, at that time, social media was huge, and then people were just posting memes about Idiocracy becoming true, becoming real life, and things like that. And I think that really did bring the movie back into the zeitgeist, because even though, to your point, James, yeah, it made a lot of money on rentals after it was released, I think it still came and went and wasn't really in the pop culture zeitgeist like Office Space was until Donald Trump became a candidate, became president, and then it kind of became more of a thing people were talking about online again.
I think that there definitely was a divide in the year 2020. I feel like once COVID came, and whether you're talking about masks or vaccines or even anything about hand washing or anything, someone might show you, here's a study that shows blank. Yeah, fuck you.
Right.
Like, that was the response. 20 years ago, they might have just said, oh, well, that study's paid for by big blank. Then it just became, fuck you.
And that feels like something that you would hear from a character in Idiocracy.
Exactly. You do see that breakdown. And I think it didn't happen in 2006, but for me, it had definitely happened by now. And for me, it was really that year in 2020.
Let me ask you a question. And I know you guys watched it not too long ago for the podcast. I want to say 2020, maybe 2021. You guys watched Jaws.
Yeah.
I didn't have the pleasure of rewatching that, but I do remember you guys talking about, like, science denialism and wondering if it was that flagrant in that movie like it is here.
Well, the thing about watching Jaws during COVID was everyone's saying that Outbreak is the COVID movie or zombie movies are the COVID movie. And no, it was Jaws because the mayor in whatever that town was is saying, no, there are no sharks and there are no shark attacks when there's a shark that's eating people. So yeah, I guess there was some denialism in Jaws. With this movie, it's not necessarily about denialism. It's more about ignorance, where people just don't know what electrolytes are. And like that meeting in the Situation Room or whatever room it is in the White House where Joe is trying to explain why plants need water and they're just going around in circles of plants crave electrolytes. Well, what are electrolytes? Well, they're what plants crave. And even that simple definition that you gave earlier, James, of, yeah, they're salts, that's not even said. Joe doesn't know that. Right. Because remember, Joe's not smart. He's just average. And all he knows is that you don't water plants with sports drinks. You water them with water. And, he doesn't know that electrolytes are salts and things like that. But it's different in terms of denialism versus ignorance, I guess is my point. But it is still stupidity, just a different flavor of it.
The idea is the average human for, I would say, about somewhere between 40 and 80,000 years since the age of agriculture, the late Stone Age, early Bronze Age at these times, every human on the planet, I think, knows that water feeds plants. I think this is a basic human knowledge that Joe is teaching these people. He doesn't know anything about plant growing. He doesn't know anything about daytime hours and when to actually plant things. He knows nothing about that.
But the interesting thing is part of the reason why these people don't know and why Joe does know is because Brando bought the FCC, they bought the FDA, and they use those mechanisms to brainwash all the people, and Joe didn't have the benefit, or whatever you want to call it, of having been brainwashed, which is why these people know, okay, electrolytes are what plants crave, and then when the folks over at Brando catch wind of what's going on, then they sick the mob on Joe.
Yes, and that kind of commentary I thought was funny about how this one corporation bought all of these government agencies and can now do whatever the fuck they want. Then Joe says, oh, we're going to start watering plants with water. And then instantly Brando is like out of business and has to lay off half of the country. Like, well, wouldn't they just test out this theory on a couple of plants and not just instantly make all plants across the country be watered with water and not Brando? Like, wouldn't they test out this theory that this new guy Joe is saying?
Are you saying these people are incredibly stupid, Al?
Well, yes, but see, then you kind of run into the internal logic of this movie, which is the thing that you're not supposed to do and the annoying shit that I do. I know.
You can't do that because this society has electricity. Somebody is running a reactor somewhere.
Right.
Like, you can't think about these things. Or maybe the reactor is running Canada, which actually still has a society or somewhere else. But you cannot think about this. Brando, someone is getting sodium electrolytes to put in there because plants crave them.
And that's the interesting thing. I mean, this is definitely commentary because look at what's happened to our government today, how it's become captive to big oil, how it's become captive to the gun manufacturers, how it's become captive to the telecoms, how it's become captive 30 or 40 or 50 years ago to the cigarette companies.
Yeah.
These things are real, and you know what? There were people who pissed off the cigarette companies and their lives were made a living hell as a result of that.
Yes, and I think that's kind of my point, which is that when this movie sort of dips its toe into more big picture social commentary and satire, I feel like, yeah, you're on to something here, Mike Judge. I like where you're going with this. And to me, the obvious way to go with it, kind of speaking to your point, James, is obviously there are intelligent people here who are, in fact, running the show, who are making the Brando, who are creating the electricity. At the execution scene, there are these like giant monster trucks. Someone's got to build those fucking things. That's not an easy thing to do, to just assemble these giant monster trucks. Clearly, there are people with intelligence in this world. And I don't want to tell you how to write a script, Mike Judge, but it seems to me like there's an obvious plot here about the real secret society, the intelligentsia that's secretly pulling the strings, like the thing that all the crazy conspiracy theorists say, maybe there is a room somewhere with super geniuses who are pulling the strings.
No, he's saying not in this world. You can't think of this.
I know. But it's just the reason that I do think of it is because, kind of to your point, Mike, like there are some of these parallels that are sort of hinted at. And I'm like, yeah, I want more of that. And the movie doesn't really give you more of that. And I was craving more of that. That's what I crave.
I like that.
There you go. See, tying it all back together. Are there things about President Camacho that you think are particularly Trump-like?
I'm thinking about Trump saying that he wouldn't mind throwing a couple of these immigrants into the gladiator arena and letting them duke it out for who gets to stay and who's got to go.
Okay. I feel like a lot of the discourse around Idiocracy now is about, well, Trump is like Camacho. And I don't really think they are that similar, really. I think the one thing that they very obviously have in common...
Blonde hair.
No, stupid hair. Oh, okay. Like, they both just have the most ridiculous fucking haircuts ever, even though their haircuts are very different. There's two other things that Trump and Camacho have in common. One is that they're dumb. I'll say it, I don't care. But I think the main thing is that they're both elected because they're famous. And we don't see the election that put Camacho in power, but we know that he's a famous wrestler and a famous porn star, and those are not qualifications for someone to be president, but that's all we get about his backstory. And Donald Trump was the first president in the nation's history to have no political experience or military experience and was elected president. That is the real thing. President Trump and President Camacho were elected primarily, presumably, based on name recognition.
We've been doing that for 45 years. My entire life has been name recognition. Well, yes. Ronald Reagan was elected because of name recognition. George Bush was elected because he had name recognition. He was the vice president. Bill Clinton came out of nowhere. Then we had Bush Jr. Barack Obama was, that's a famous, came out of nowhere. You had Trump versus Hillary Clinton, so again the Clintons. Then 2020, you're still on Biden. We've really gone on name recognition. And a lot of those people aren't necessarily politics to start with. Ronald Reagan wasn't. Hillary Clinton wasn't. Bill Clinton was a lawyer. Most of these people were not, they didn't start out as 25-year-old congressmen.
True. And name recognition has always been a big part of politics. You're 1,000% right about that. But Donald Trump was the first person who was really just a celebrity who came out of nowhere with no political experience, who then was elected president.
Yes.
Even Reagan was governor of California first. California is a bigger government than most countries in the world.
Right.
So he did have political experience. So you're right, but also it has been taken to a new extreme with Trump. But I do think it's worth pointing out all the ways that Trump and Camacho are very different. Camacho is super jacked, in prime physical condition.
You haven't seen those pictures of Trump, have you?
Oh, yeah. The digitally altered ones, sure. But the real life ones, come on. Camacho acknowledges that the country has problems while he is president. He doesn't blame immigrants for those problems. He knows that he's not a very smart person, and he asks someone smarter than him to help solve those problems. President Camacho admits to having sex with porn stars. Unlike Trump. That was a good one. Come on. That's a good one. Also,
well played.
Thank you. I worked on this list a little bit. You can tell. Also, Camacho seems to enjoy being president in that motorcade, and he's drinking beers. Like, he seems to be having a good time.
He seems to also have a moral compass to an extent. He saves Joe in the end.
That's true. He was about to let him die, but that is a good point. Also, Joe becomes the next president, and you see that at Joe's inauguration, Camacho's there. He's smiling. He's applauding. He is supporting the peaceful transition of power.
Just like Trump.
I mean, there you go. So I do think that the Trump is Camacho things are in some ways right, in some ways very wrong. But Mike, let me ask you about Idiocracy as a whole. Do you think the movie stands the test of time?
A lot of these things we've talked about definitely do. The trouble is, it's not the movie I want it to be. And it's not the movie that it can be. And that's the frustrating thing about it. The heavy-handedness with which they make certain points, the ignoring of certain other things within that universe. The language in certain places, sure, maybe you need it, maybe you don't, I don't really know. But it was a hard one to get through, and I didn't want it to be that way, but it was. And I like Mike Judge. I think Mike Judge puts out some brilliant shit, which we've discussed here. And I think that there's a lot of really valid points here. And I do think that in certain ways, yes, it's ahead of its time, not even just standing the test of time, but too much just really doesn't work for all the reasons that we've discussed. And at the end of the day, I didn't enjoy it, and I want to enjoy it. So for that reason, I'm going to say no.
Al, what do you think? Does 2006's Idiocracy stand the test of time?
I gotta tell you, I was really torn on this one because the way that this movie has entered the pop culture lexicon now, I think because of Trump, in a way does make it stand the test of time, where if you were talking to someone who had never seen this movie, odds are decent that if you said something like, oh, well, it's kind of like Idiocracy, they would know what you mean, even if they don't know all of the details about Rondo and electrolytes and Camacho and things like that. I think that they would at least get the reference. So I think in that way, the movie very much does stand the test of time. And there are also other things in this movie that have been prescient. The way that Joe and Rita are thought out is because there's this avalanche of garbage. There have been garbage avalanches in real life. There was one that killed people, I think in China, maybe a few years ago. Like these giant mountains of garbage that no one knows what to do with. That's a real thing. It's awful.
People are burying garbage on mountains?
No, that there's just like these giant piles of landfill garbage, and then there was like an avalanche.
A mountain of garbage that collapses on somebody.
Yeah, not on one person, but yeah.
I didn't realize that. It's a shitty way to go.
Oh yeah, it's fucking terrible. The way that this movie parodies Fox News is also awesome. Kind of spot on, where it's just a shirtless dude and like a sexy babe just kind of saying random shit. It's just all about appearances. Oh, also, it isn't just an American problem, but birth rates are down. And that's not a smart people, dumb people thing like it's portrayed in this movie, but that is a thing. Also tying into the 2024 election, that's where you have Vance talking about childless cat ladies and shit like that. But some of the things that the movie talks about do feel relevant and relatable. And I think the sentiment of we're getting dumber is a thing that a lot of people think. I mean, honestly, James, just on the way over to your apartment tonight, I almost walked into 5 people who were staring down, looking at their fucking phones and not watching where they're going. I saw one guy almost get hit by a bike because he was crossing the street staring at his phone. That seems like the kind of thing that would happen in Idiocracy when a coffin crashes in through Frito's apartment and he doesn't look up because he's too busy watching TV.
Ow, my balls.
Exactly. His favorite show, Ow, My Balls. So there is stuff in this movie that does really feel timeless, quite frankly. The problem I have with the movie is that I think the satire works, but like at a bare minimum. And I do think that Mike Judge is capable of a much wittier, much more clever satire than what we have here. And while there is a lot in this movie that I enjoyed, I'm gonna land on no, that it doesn't stand the test of time, just because it's making some points about dumb people, but not really about why people are dumb and why some people have more kids than other people. That question of why and how these things are happening are also ripe for satire, and Mike Judge kind of just doesn't bother and instead points his finger and laughs at dumb people, which, okay, fine, that's funny and lowbrow, but I think this movie could be more. So I'm going to say that it does not stand the test of time. But James, what do you think?
I do want to say something really great about this film that we really haven't talked about yet. And Maya Rudolph, who is hysterical in this film.
So good.
She has this accent that I don't know where to place it, but I just love every time she talks. She's funny. Just the way she's afraid of Upgrade, her pimp, who we find out in the end credits scene that he actually did get frozen. And Joe keeps telling her, no, Upgrade's not coming. And she's like, no, you don't understand. That man will find a way.
Yeah.
And, he did find a way. Hysterical. The whole cast really brings it. Dax Shepard's character is really annoying, but I think he's supposed to be incredibly annoying.
Yes.
Luke Wilson's always great as an everyman. Yeah, he's kind of similar to how he is in like Old School. He's great in that role. I hear what you guys are saying, that this movie is not the movie maybe we all wish it was. Maybe it was that really deep, witty political commentary, funny yet intelligent. But that's not what this is. I did watch this with someone who had never seen this film and actually had never heard of this film.
Okay.
And they thought it was hysterical. And I think it's lowbrow humor. I think it's aged better than it was meant to age. For me, I was able to get it. I'm a Mike Judge fan. But for me, I really like this film. I think it stands up. I think it stands the test of time. I think it's funny. I think it's stupid. It's witty. There's not much more to it. There's not a higher level to it. I think the commentary hits you on the head what it's trying to say. I agree. I would have maybe appreciated a little more Office Space wit. But for me, the film works.
The thing is, there's a lot there that even if you don't love the movie, you can like and you can appreciate.
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that just because it doesn't stand the test of time, in my view, does in your side, mean that there aren't counter arguments and very strong ones. If the movie weren't made by Mike Judge, we might not have such high standards for it.
Yeah.
Fair.
But if the movie weren't made by Mike Judge, we probably wouldn't be sitting here talking about this movie. We'd be talking about something else.
Also, just tying back to something else you mentioned, James. Yeah, Maya Rudolph is great. And she has had a career resurgence now because she's on Saturday Night Live playing Kamala Harris. She is amazing in that role. She's amazing in Idiocracy. She is just wonderful. And also, to your point about the way she talks, I think I heard it on the Seth Meyers and Lonely Island podcast where they were talking about her. And they were specifically talking about her voice and how she can pronounce any word you could think of in the funniest fucking possible way. That's just one of her talents. I think that's just something that she is great at. And I am very glad that she is playing Kamala Harris on SNL because she's fantastic. But Mike, it's been great having you here. And this is your 5th time here. Mm-hmm. We do a little something for people who have been guests on the show 5 times. Mm-hmm. So hold on, let me get it out of this bag here. Mike, it is my honor to welcome you to the 5 Timers Club. Here's your hoodie.
And I get to wear James and Alan everywhere I go now.
There you go. That is your special gift, your special 5 Timers Club hoodie. I'm going to take a picture of you in that for the Instagram. But you deserved it, man. Well done.
I love it.
Awesome. And you're coming back in a couple weeks for your 6th appearance.
How did that happen?
Well, it happened because you requested to come on to talk about The Wizard of Oz, and there's a new movie in that franchise, kinda, coming out in a few weeks. So we'll have you back soon to talk about The Wizard of Oz.
Well, I guess I'll be clicking my heels together 3 times and wishing to be back in the city.
There's no place like the Test of Time podcast.
On that, we all agree.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us, Mike. That's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we have another special guest joining us. Your sister, Joanna, is coming back on the show to talk about Being John Malkovich, a movie that's celebrating its 25th anniversary and a movie that I'm really excited to rewatch.
That will be fun.
Yes. So looking forward to that conversation. In the meantime, we want to hear from you guys. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. Let us know your thoughts about Idiocracy and President Camacho and electrolytes. And if you want to talk about the real 2024 election, sure, go for it. Why not? We'll all be following that closely. Hopefully this episode brought you a little bit of a break from doom scrolling. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.
And go vote, everyone.